Good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into Morning JOX, JOX 94.5. Damian, very cold start here in the city of Birmingham. Of course, we have some weather coming in tomorrow, so everyone please be safe, be weather aware. It's cold. I think when I woke up this morning, I think it might have been 23 degrees, and it feels like it's like 19, and it felt like it. Something that down here in Alabama, I would say we get used to, but we don't. We're mostly ready for the anytime summer type feel before we get to this brutally cold stretch that we're going through in January. So please be weather aware, especially tomorrow. There's going to be winter weather, chances of snow pretty high, especially north of Birmingham. Birmingham's kind of right there in that sweet spot where we might get some cold rain, some ice rain, and sleet and a wintry mix and all that stuff. But anyway, just make sure that you're locked and loaded and you are prepared for what may come in the next couple of days during this cold stretch. But we had some it was hot on the basketball court, I will say that, for again. So the past two nights we've gotten a chance to see Auburn on Tuesday night as they knocked off Texas on the road, and Alabama hit the road last night, and they come away with a road victory over the South Carolina Gamecocks. And the one thing about this Alabama team, it's kind of one of those things where if you try to play their style, you find yourself really starting to press if you're a basketball team. And I think that South Carolina kind of fell victim to that, and they realized, okay, once Alabama starts to jump on you in a lead, you can't try to go tit for tat from the 3-point line if you're not making your baskets on the opposite side because of how their defensive pressure is set up and the way that they swing it around, they attack, they jump on you quick. And it felt as though, like, early on, Alabama made a statement like, hey, we're not here to play around with y'all. There's things that we need to accomplish. Y'all are another team in the way, as Alabama knocks off South Carolina 88-68 there in Columbia. And it's kind of it's the same recipe as last year where Mark Sears is the engine, but everything around him, when they are elevating their game and they're playing to their level, Alabama's one of the tough teams to beat, and they have an argument along with other teams like Florida, Auburn, of being the best team in the conference when they're on.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, Mark Sears was spectacular last night. I think you watch this version of Alabama and, I mean, you're kind of splitting hairs between some of the top teams in the country, but I think you can certainly argue that when they're playing well, they might be the best team in the country. Now, I think Auburn, from a consistency standpoint, and they're certainly, in terms of the rankings, will be number one if they beat South Carolina this weekend. But I mean, I think Alabama's right there neck and neck with them, and especially once they figure things out and are a little more consistent defensively, because I mean, overall, I mean, you held a team to under 70 points last night in the SEC. You can definitely live with that, but there were times where you got a little sloppy, especially early in the second half, and you saw Nate Oates get pretty animated. And I know at one point, it was like, I think he took all the starters out, and it was essentially hey, y'all don't play well enough on defense coming out of half, so we're just going to mix it up for you a little bit there. And I don't know. I like sending a message that way as a coach. It's kind of a fun way to get some other people a look and let them know, hey, you're scoring a lot, but goes two ways on this basketball court. And we know that that's been something. I mean, even going back to last year when Alabama was the best offensive team in the country and not very good defensively, they figured that out late in the season. And so they seem to be coming along in that regard. But I mean, you had Nate Oates at half court at one point screaming at dudes because they were being lazy on the defensive side of the ball. But hey, when you can have those kinds of moments and beat a team by 20 on the road in the SEC, you're going to take that. I mean, now you just look at their first two games in conference play. You are plus 50 in scoring differential in your first two SEC games. So that's a heck of a start for Alabama. Got a big one coming up against Texas A&M this weekend that looks like that's going to be a top 10 matchup. So that's going to be really, really exciting. But yeah, I mean, it was a great performance from Alabama last night. You shot over 40% from three. And I think that's one thing I wanted to talk about was, Nate Oates' philosophy for so long was essentially that if you're making a 2-point shot, it needs to be a layup, right? Like, you want these high percentage shots in the paint. You don't want guys really taking a whole lot of mid-range shots. And we've seen Alabama now. I mean, they're one of the best 2-point shooting teams in the entire country in terms of shooting percentage, and it's just a little different, right? Because I mean, we're used to them raining threes, and we've seen that at times this year, but they haven't quite been hitting as many threes as we've expected from them in the past. But they've been so efficient when it comes to, scoring on little floaters, scoring in the paint, having some of those mid-range shots. They've been so good at that it allows them to score at such a high volume. And it's just, a little bit of a different style for some of these guys in the way that it works, but the results certainly speak for themselves. So, yeah, super impressive win for Alabama last night, knocking off South Carolina. And I have a feeling that the Gamecocks are going to be tired of the state of Alabama here by the end of the weekend.
Yeah, because Auburn is next up for South Carolina this weekend. And just looking at the SEC slate last night as a whole, as one of the more entertaining games that we've seen early on with Texas A&M and Oklahoma, which is right after the Alabama-South Carolina game, I kind of zoned out once I saw Oklahoma. I think they got up to about 14, 15-point lead. I was like, okay, well, Texas A&M, they're right there. Like their ranking doesn't really match up. And then I flipped back over in the second half, and I kept seeing Texas A&M chipping away. And then they messed around and won the ball game. They knocked off Oklahoma 80-78. One about Texas A&M, to me, I like their basketball team more than I do their football team. I can actually find myself to be able to stomach and watching Buzz Williams and those guys play the way that they do, because they're like gnats. Like, they just continue. It's like, hey, we may be down, but we're still right there to still fight. It's almost like they don't even care what the score is. We'll see at the end of the game what the score is for Texas A&M. And for Oklahoma, start things off. Now they're 0-2 to start off SEC play. You play two of the better teams in the conference, but you're also looked at as one of the better teams in the conference too. So you kind of find yourself in that, all right, it's early. Can we ride the ship the rest of the way? But they're going to have to find a way to beat these teams that are ahead of them early on, and they haven't passed that test early on the first two games of SEC play. But Zurich Phelps for Texas A&M, the second half was his. And I was trying to figure out how they found a way to come back and keep clawing back. Oh, it's because of Zurich Phelps. All he did was just drop 34 points, 28 of them in the second half. Texas A&M, if they continue to play like that, one, they shouldn't fall too early in games, because I don't know if they'll be able to just say, hey, Z, we need you for the rest of the way. He's going to have to start off a little bit better. But I think Texas A&M is probably one of those teams we're going to be looking at as we get closer to March of, if they're starting to peak, you don't want to play them, because we've seen them in multiple years have runs in, the SEC tournament and things. And I remember, when Buzz Williams was trying to convince everybody that they should be in the.
I don't think he's going to have to do that this year.
No. He's not going to write a 500-word essay on why.
Yeah, a manifesto on.
Yeah, of why A&M should be in the NCAA tournament, because this is a tournament team. I do agree. They're ranking at number 10 right now, give or take. But I do think for the SEC as a whole, you're starting to see within the last 2 days, yeah, this conference ain't nothing to play with.
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas A&M is firmly. I mean, I think right now you probably look at Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, and Florida kind of as maybe that top tier of the SEC right now, and then Texas A&M would be right under them with, the Kentuckys of the world and teams like that. I mean, again, there's 4 or 5 SEC teams in the top 10 right now, so they're obviously pretty good. But I mean, if you're Oklahoma, you have to be sick to your stomach losing this game. They shot almost 60% from 3-point range. They were 14 of 24 from 3-point range, and they lost. They shot over 50% from the floor, but they had 15 less shot attempts than Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you look at, I mean, the efficiency of Oklahoma for the shots they were able to get up were fantastic. It was just they didn't have the same opportunities and second chances that Texas A&M got. And yeah, that one's going to sting, because, I mean, you're Oklahoma. You said it. I mean, you're 13-0. You're coming into SEC play in your first year. You're feeling good. You're a top 20 team. Then you go and you get beat by 30 against Alabama, and then you pick yourself back up. You go out there. You shoot lights out against Texas A&M. It just isn't enough to get the job done. And, yeah, I mean, that's brutal, but that's just how it's going to be in the SEC this year, right? There's going to be good teams that maybe don't have the best conference record just because somebody's going to have to lose these games. And it just shows how competitive the league is, but it also shows you, I think, the importance of, why the Auburns and Alabamas of the world, why you play these difficult non-conference schedules, because it does help you in March,
Yep.
absolutely, but it also helps you in conference play, right? Because you've been playing these high-level opponents leading into conference play instead of, let's be honest, there's a lot of teams out there that, you just go and you pick up, 10 or 11 wins early in the season, and then you get into conference play and hope you can get, another 8 or 9 and get into the tournament. And Oklahoma, I mean, they're still good. They're a tournament team, no doubt about it. But, I think you can see where those early difficult non-conference tests can really help you out once you start things off, especially in a league like the SEC that is by far the best conference in college basketball, at least right now.
Absolutely. And how about, the growing pains in conference play for one John Calipari there at Arkansas as they fought Ole Miss last night, 73-66. First half, you go into halftime tied 33-33, and it felt as though Arkansas, when they needed a break, they couldn't get it. And it wasn't like Ole Miss was just lighting them up because they only shot 46% from the field, 39% from three. It was the shots that Arkansas was missing in the second half that just started to feel like, oh man, this game is starting to slip away from me. You could see they were starting to press. And I know Coach Cal is a good coach and everything that we've seen when he was at Kentucky, but I think I know what Arkansas wanted in getting John Calipari, and they wanted a splash, but this doesn't seem like a team that's going to be. There's no one and dones on this Arkansas roster. He's actually taking it back to the old school way of trying to develop these guys. But right now, you don't have time with the way this SEC gauntlet is. And I don't know if Arkansas is going to. They're going to have to make a mean push in February and trying to get into the NCAA tournament if they possibly can, because right now Coach Cal is looking at he's going to have an uphill battle the rest of the way. And for Chris Beard over there at Ole Miss and the way that they play and the style in which they play, defensively, they're probably one of the better teams in the conference. And offensively, it's okay if our shots aren't falling, as long as we can make it difficult for the other team, so be it. If you win a game, scoring 73 points and the way that basketball is now, you'll take it. And if you're Chris Beard, we're playing with house money. We don't have to go out here and be, completely lights out. But I don't know if that style's still going to be able to maintain the rest of the way. But early on, you'll take it. You're sitting 2-0 in conference play, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, I mean, you'll certainly take that. And I think Ole Miss is, I think a little different than last year, where I think we all kind of saw they were a paper tiger last year. And again, you stacked up a lot of wins that maybe weren't super impressive, but it looked good when you looked at the standings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now Chris Beard being there for another year, and I think we also have to remember that similar to, I would say like, kind of like where Auburn was with Bruce Pearl coming in. I mean, that program really wasn't much to speak of.
Mm-hmm.
And, now you have them in the top 25 just a couple of years later. I know they were in the top 25 at times last year as well, but that is certainly impressive. But yeah, I mean, the main story is going to be Arkansas and Coach Cal. And, I heard some of his comments after the game, and, it's just kind of odd, the way he talks about his team, and I don't know, it kind of made me feel, if anybody heard what Mick Cronin, the UCLA coach, said yesterday, essentially it's hard to coach guys that are delusional, and, hey, I think my players are good kids, but they're a little delusional about how good they are. Like, they have an inflated sense of self. And I got kind of shades of that from Coach Cal last night after the game, just almost of hearing him break down of, oh, well, I'll take questions in a minute, but yeah, I mean, we're a good team, but we're going to need everybody to contribute, and everybody's going to play well. Now, they don't have to go out there and, light it up every night, but if we have anybody play poorly, it's not going to go well for us. And, just essentially acting like, his team doesn't understand the fundamentals of basketball.
Right.
And I mean, okay, I feel like that kind of falls on you as the coach, right? Like, these are kind of situations on top of the fact that, I mean, you brought in a lot of guys that have played college basketball, like they had experience. And, as we see in these cases, sometimes guys just don't gel together.
Yep.
When you bring in a bunch of new faces, you have a new coach, it's a new kind of style. there are growing pains that come with that. And if you're Arkansas, maybe you were expecting that, but it's still just it's wild to think about, Arkansas coming off of back-to-back Elite Eight appearances under Musselman and looking at times going into, I want to say 2 years ago. I mean, they were getting legitimate buzz for, Final Four, maybe a national championship contender. Like, that's how good
Mm-hmm.
that team was and that program was, and how they had that success in the NCAA tournament for a couple of years in a row. And now it just completely fell apart. And, for them to go from being one of probably, I would say, the five best teams in the SEC to, being in the bottom half, it's pretty wild. And I know they'll be patient, but when you bring in a guy like Coach Calipari and you make everything happen that you did to bring him over to Fayetteville, yeah, that's not gonna, not gonna fly for too long. People have too high of expectations, and he's too big of a name to not have success there pretty quickly. And you pair that with the football program, and people are going to be frustrated pretty quickly and want to see things change, I think.
Absolutely. How about the suit texting in this early this morning? He says, "Do you think we will see the same fan frustration with hoops the same way we do in football with this new compensation era?" I don't know. I don't think.
I feel like it's different in basketball just because a lot of the guys that are going to be now, not everybody, because we've seen some crazy NIL deals for guys that you're like, man, they
Right.
average 10 points a game and you're paying them $2 million. But at least, all right, let's take the kid at BYU, right? Diabansa, the number one overall recruit for next year. And they're paying him between like $5 and $7 million is kind of the rumored number that's out there. And I get you're paying that for 1 year, but in college basketball, you're already used to guys going to college for a year and then going
And
to
go
the NBA.
exactly.
So it's not as much of a big deal, I feel like. Whereas in college, you have to stay for 3 years. And so you feel like, well, we recruited you, so we should get to watch you play for 3 years. Whereas in basketball, I think we're already kind of conditioned. If you're really good, you're going to be gone after a year.
Yeah, like you don't have that connection with these guys as deeper because it's almost look at somewhat as a detriment if you're there for 4 years, if you're not as, you're not as good. But if the team is still having success, I don't think many fans they just want to see five players that go out there and ball out and do what they do because they don't really have that sort of appeal as they do like a football team because it takes so much more. Whereas in basketball, it could be, bench player number 12, all of a sudden he goes for 31 game. And if you don't really know who he is, all you care about is my team advancing, moving forward. And like you said, we've been conditioned of, oh yeah, he was there. He played it what year? Oh, he's already 24 in the NBA. And he's been in the league for 7 years. It's like, okay, well now it makes sense. So I don't know if we'll see that much of it because a lot of these guys, like you said, like Conrad said, they're conditioned to be one and done guys. And
Better
just
than the
moving
slip
on.
up yesterday.
Yeah. I don't know. It kind of stuck there for a little bit. But I mean, imagine we're in football season and somebody gets beat, 60-0, and we say they got butt raced, and it would just go from there. 205-834-9450. It's not final score Friday, but we do have a college football playoff game tonight. Penn State and Notre Dame, 6:30 from the Orange Bowl. What do you think the final score is going to be? Who will be the first team to lock themselves title game? Will it be Penn State? Will it be Notre Dame? We want to hear from you. 205-830. Your text messages, your calls are always welcome as we dive into the college football playoff game as we are less than 12 hours away from kickoff there in Miami. Notre Dame and Penn State. Keep it locked right here on Morning JOX and JOX 94.5. 623 here on Morning JOX, JOX 94.5, and Damian Mitchell alongside Conrad Van Order here with you. You're on the McElroy and Kubelik in the morning. Both of those guys there in Miami for the Orange Bowl kicking off tonight between Notre Dame and Penn State. One of these teams will be advancing to the national championship game. They'll be waiting the winner between Ohio State and Texas tomorrow night. And the closer we get to kickoff, also, let me, before we get into that, I want to get your reaction, Conrad. I hadn't got a chance to talk to you since the announcement, but Jeremy Bernard, receiver for Alabama, announces that he will be returning in 2025. I think the bigger question mark is who's going to be throwing him the ball, but just your reaction of hearing that Jeremy Bernard, a guy that knows Kalen DeBoer, played with him at Washington, comes down to Alabama. I'm not going to say he doesn't. He made plays when his number was called. I will say he was probably Ryan Williams at times, probably more consistent receiver that you had there. And also just an older guy to keep that room that has been, hit with the transfer portal. But the older guy that's keeping that room together as far as is. Just want to get your reaction on Jeremy Bernard announcing he's coming back to Alabama.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great news. You also had Jamarian Latham, defensive lineman, announce he was coming back yesterday too. So two pieces of good news for Alabama. But yeah, no, I mean, with Jeremy, I mean, he led the team, and I know we just assume Ryan Williams led Alabama in all the receiving categories this year, and I mean, he was spectacular. But I mean, Jeremy Bernard had the most receptions on the team this year, and like you said, having that veteran presence, a guy that's familiar with Kalen DeBoer's offense to kind of help again in this offseason of continuing to get guys acclimated, very familiar with Jamarcus Shepard, the wide receivers coach as well, obviously. And, I mean, let's call it what it is. Alabama had two receivers this year. But whether that was by design or not, that's essentially what you got. It was him and Ryan Williams, and everyone else got scraps. So, no, I mean, it's good to bring him back. And, you mentioned it. You had so many guys leaving the transfer portal that, I could understand where maybe that would have been a little bit of a concern, but now, you feel pretty good. I would imagine going in, I would think your three set would be Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, and then Isaiah Horton, the Miami transfer. You got Rico Scott, a young guy who I think showed some things this year who will probably factor in. Jalen Hale coming back from injury, Cole Adams as well. So you got a pretty good right there 6-man rotation at wide receiver that I think you should feel pretty good about. But yeah, having Jeremy come back and just, having some continuity there at that position is good. And I mean, when you look at it, I mean, if you're Alabama, you're bringing back 3 of your starting offensive linemen, 1 of your starting running, 2 of your top 3 running backs, your top 2 receivers. You got 8 starters coming back on defense. And that might make some people unhappy because you look at how the season went, you go, man, do we really want all these guys back? But yeah, I think the guys that stuck around are guys you should be happier there, and you just got to fill in some gaps here and there now. And but yeah, it ultimately will come down to who is throwing them the ball. That is going to be the question throughout the offseason, of course. But yeah, I mean, as it stands right now, pretty good for Alabama, and I think maybe now just I know the transfer portal stuff still has some people on the edge, and don't feel great about how that went, but I think Alabama made it a point that they wanted to go and find guys that could make an impact immediately. And if you're not that kind of guy, then I think they wanted to allocate some of those funds to bring back guys that they know fit the system and they are familiar with. And I think that's a smart play because I think especially still fresh with Kalen DeBoer, having guys going into their second year of the system, it should help.
Absolutely.
Should help.
It should. I agree with you 100%. So just an update on Alabama. Also, guys that will be returning in 2025, but we still have to crown a national champion in 2024, and that starts with the Orange Bowl tonight between Notre Dame and Penn State. And as we get closer to kickoff, man, I keep going back and forth because coming into the season, I didn't really have Penn State in this situation. I really didn't. I thought they would slip up in the regular season where they would just be on the outside looking in. Just because of everything that we've seen from James Franklin over the years, every time you start to believe in him, he's got the Lane Kiffin in him. It's how do you find yourself in these positions? But, I mean, week in and week out, outside the matchups between Ohio State and Oregon, they've handled their business. I think for Penn State, finding themselves in this position and the path that they took, knocking off SMU there in the first round of the playoffs, and it just, I mean, SMU looked completely shell shocked. They didn't look like they belonged on the field with them. And then follow that up with Boise State, who at the first round bye, and you got them, and it never really felt like Boise had much of a chance. Pretty much, if it was stopping Ashton Genty and let everybody else try to, be good enough to beat you, and that didn't happen. So I think their path has been marked primarily kind of quote unquote easier than what Notre Dame has done. And boy, this Notre Dame team has completely flipped the script. Like they have gone. It really has looked like one of the best teams, if not the best team in college football for a while, because they've gone out there and handled their business. And then when they matched up with Indiana didn't belong on the field with them. It was cold up there in South Bend, but Notre Dame handled their business. And then when they matched up with Georgia, I felt coming into it, okay, yeah, I know Brock Vandagriff, Gunnar Stockton was going to be the starter over Carson Beck due to injury. But it wasn't like I came away thinking that if Carson Beck would have played in that ball game, that Notre Dame just wasn't the better team that day. And they proved it. And I think, some key drops by Georgia didn't help. And Notre Dame really they made the plays they needed to. They didn't ask Riley Leonard to go out there and set the passing record. It was just be smart, be efficient with the football. Let's run the ball. And I think that's a good recipe in order to find a way to beat this Penn State team, because if Abdul Carter isn't 100%, that's going to have an impact on Penn State defensively. Now, how well does he play, even at 85, 80%, to be determined. But I do think that Notre Dame has shown week in and week out since that loss to Northern Illinois that they're one of the better teams in college football. And I think that Marcus Freeman has coached these guys exceptionally well, especially on the defensive side, where if you don't find a way to run the football against them, you're putting a lot of pressure on Drew Aller at the quarterback position to go out there and make plays. Now, they do have Tyler Warren. They do have a few receivers that can go out and make those big plays. But if they're getting pressure and rushing the operation for Penn State, I could see this being kind of an onslaught for Notre Dame. And I'm leaning more towards Notre Dame than I did earlier in the week. But I have to trust my eyes on what I've seen from Notre Dame these past couple of weeks of like, all right, now, if Penn State finds himself down, 10, 14, nothing, it's going to be hard for me to believe that Drew Aller's going to have, another bag in his pull out something in his bag of tricks and just try to find a way to beat them through the air. But you do have that running game with Singleton and
Katron Allen.
Katron Allen, and the way that they run the ball and there's 1-2 punch. You're going to have to find a way to neutralize those guys. Not to say that Penn State doesn't have the playmakers. It's just how many plays are they going to have in order against this Notre Dame defense who has shown up week in and week out.
Yeah, I think that this is – again, I think they match up just so well with each other with kind of the style of play that they have where, both of them have, the two-headed monster in the backfield. You have you have capable quarterbacks, but they have a little bit of a different style to them, and they're not – it's not necessarily, hey, we're going to give you the ball and you're going to go win us this football game, right? That's just not really kind of the style that they play. And, defensively, they're both so physical. And I think that's the one thing, with both of these teams is you never really had to worry that much about them defensively. It's just, all right, what can we see from you offensively? And, I know, Marcus Freeman said yesterday at their press conference that Jeremiah Love is good to go for the game tonight, which is huge for Notre Dame. Having him back as he was banged up after the Indiana game. But I am with you in the sense that I'm not going to be surprised if Penn State wins this game, but I just think Notre Dame, with the confidence they built up after the Georgia game and just showing the physicality and the way that they've dominated the two opponents that they've played, and I understand that Penn State has done the same thing, but in my opinion, I still think Notre Dame, I think Indiana and Georgia are both bigger challenges than Boise State and SMU, in my opinion. And I give a little more credit to what I saw Notre Dame be able to do in those matchups than what I saw from Penn State. But, as we've talked about throughout the week, I still think the X factor ultimately is, can somebody make an explosive play in the passing game, right? Can somebody break it open? Or maybe, it's like in the Indiana game, right? Where you are kind of in a situation and you're like, oh man, this game could go one way or the other. Boom, 90-yard touchdown run. And that's kind of the final nail in the coffin there, even though you have, 45 minutes left to play. So, who can break out offensively, who can win the line of scrimmage. It's I feel like this is maybe going to be a lower scoring game just because of the style that both of these teams play with. And I could see it being, similar to the Georgia game where it's just kind of maybe you have some field goals early, but it's just kind
Mm-hmm.
of back and forth, trading blows, trading punts. And then, of course, as we saw, in the Georgia game, you have that big turnover at the end of the half, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of the game. And Georgia just couldn't claw themselves out of that hole. So, I'm super excited for this game. I think it's the most hilarious matchup we could have had in the playoffs this year because the two teams that we perennially think are overrated and don't deserve to be in the playoff, and now they're playing for a spot in the national championship game. And yeah, I mean, hats off to Marcus Freeman and James Franklin for getting to this point and being able to step up and show that their teams can handle the spotlight a little bit better than I think a lot of us were expecting them to. So it's going to be a great game. Got to have a lot on the line, and we'll see how the other game goes. But um, yeah, just there's just that scary monster on the other side that one of these teams is potentially going to
Right.
have to face. But you know what? We'll deal with that when we deal with that. And you just got to play the game tonight and get a win. And I'm sure it's warm down there too. That sounds nice.
Must be nice.
Must be nice.
It must be nice. Big John text in 205-834-9450. Kind of how we do on Fridays. We do Final Score Friday. He sends his score predictions for tonight. He's off Penn State 31-23. And he also has Ohio State knocking off Texas tomorrow night 38-28. So he has Ohio State and Notre Dame in his national championship. We'll continue the football playoff game tonight in the Orange Bowl between Notre Dame and Penn State. Who you got? At some SEC hoops, just because of the exciting action that we're getting here in the conference, especially between Alabama and Auburn. All that and so much more here on Morning JOX and JOX 94.5. 6:39 here on Morning JOX. JOX 94.5. Damian Mitchell. I love this song. Love. Locked up and sentenced to a quarter century. Could I count on you to be there to support me mentally? Hey, 50 Cent knew what he was doing back then. Him and Nate Dogg. Shout out to very underrated as over his career. But when he was on a hook, you remembered it. That Regulate. The brother just didn't miss. And he got area codes with Ludacris. I don't think we can play that one, but that's also another one. Sidebar. That's a complete sidebar. Let's get back on track. 205-834-9450. We got some final score predictions coming in for the college football playoff game tonight between Notre Dame and Penn State. Somebody takes in, he said, just play a cupcake schedule and you will make it into the national championship. Shout out to Penn State and Notre Dame. He's got Penn State over Notre Dame 21-17 and also has Texas over Ohio State 42-35. That'll be interesting to see because it's tough for me to I know Texas can keep it close tomorrow, but if Ohio State keeps playing like the way they have been, I don't see anybody slowing them down.
This might be an overreaction, but right now, I think it is more likely. I personally think it is more likely that Ohio State beats Texas by 14 plus than Texas wins that football game at all. I think it is more likely that Ohio State beats the brakes off of them than Texas can win even a close game. And and part of that's just, I still haven't seen that game from Texas that makes you go, okay, there it is. I understand why this is viewed as one of the best teams in the SEC and one of the best teams in the entire country. I think they're good. But, man, they are going to have if that Georgia team, and I understand, but I'm sorry, if you couldn't hold on to a lead in the second half against Gunnar Stockton in the SEC championship game, we'll see how it goes tomorrow. It's going to be interesting, but.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Those teams are in different spots right now. In my opinion.
I could see Ohio State winning by a smaller margin. Then I can straight up just say Texas is going to win the football game. I mean, I love Steve Sarkisian. I like what he does on offense, but the last 4 games Quinn Ewers has thrown an interception. You give this Ohio State team an extra possession because of a turnover, that's not a recipe for success. And the way that Will Howard has been handling this offense, I mean, if Texas finds themselves down like a bunch of like Oregon and Tennessee early on by multiple touchdowns, multiple scores, I hadn't seen them, like you said, seen them put a 60-minute game yet. And I find it difficult that it's going to happen against the likes of an Ohio State in the playoff game.
Yeah, and I feel like some people maybe, you look back and you go, oh, they only beat Oregon 41-21. Like, I mean, that's a impressive win, but it was 34-0 in the second quarter.
Second quarter, my brother.
So, yeah, they definitely took their foot off the gas. So I'm excited to see that one. I think tonight maybe going to be a little more competitive.
Absolutely.
But we'll see.
Absolutely. We got Notre Dame and Penn State, 6:30 there from the Orange Bowl. Let's go to the phone lines, 205-834-9450. Miami Hater wants to talk some Notre Dame with us this morning. What's going on, Miami Hater?
Hey, guys. How are y'all doing?
Doing well, brother.
Hey, man, I want to talk about Notre Dame. This morning I was cranking out emails, reports, snapping eggs and cashing checks. But I want to pop some blue and gold balloons.
Let's do it.
This is the same Notre Dame team every year, regardless if it's Brian or whether it's Marcus, whoever's coaching. It's the same Notre Dame team. I call this the PTP, the participation playoffs, the participation trophy playoffs. I mean, they got in through the back door. They got the best seeding. And some fans may say, hey, they beat Georgia. They beat one of Kirby's worst teams.
But they absolutely dominated them. I mean, it wasn't a close game. I mean, it wasn't even a competition for a lot of them.
Come on, man. They scored all those points in like 25 seconds.
Yeah, that's incredible. Against Georgia. That's
look
impressive.
Look at how they did it, though.
They caused turnovers.
Yeah, they caused turnovers. They were more physical than Georgia.
That was a bad coaching strategy. I'm not going to say they weren't more physical. I'll just tell you this.
When have we said that about Notre Dame teams going against SEC teams, that they were the more physical program going into that ball?
No, Notre Dame really has no competition through the year. They don't play in a conference. There's no rivalries. There's no nothing. There's no conference championships. You play Georgia with a backup quarterback. Kirby, with his dad in the hospital, made some bad coaching decisions. I'll put it this way: he had a bad strategy going into that game. I'm just not a believer in Notre Dame.
Okay, so what was the bad? What was the bad strategy?
That they won't beat.
What was
Well,
the bad strategy for Georgia going into Notre Dame?
Them going for it when they went for it instead of taking a knee in the first half.
I mean, I will give you that. I think they were being too aggressive.
That set the stage. I'm not going to say again. It was one of Georgia's. It's not. It is one of Kirby's worst teams with a backup quarterback. Now we heard the narrative playing up to the game that Gunnar Stockton is better than Carson Beck. I don't buy that at all.
And so,
I didn't hear that.
I ain't hear that didn't hit my ear.
No, I did. I did from your own station. Called Miss Terry. Talked to her about it. Anyway, she's the one that pushed that, and the Georgia callers come in and supported that. I never bought it. But it is one of Kirby's worst teams. Alabama beat them. And, we underperformed. But if you look at I'm not going to say that I'll never bet, that Penn State's going to beat Notre Dame because James Franklin's coaching them. Any coach that, in the first half he's up 14, he goes for a 4th and 1 from his own 20. Don't pick that guy. But they are on the charity side of the playoffs. The other side's a monster side. They're. I'll just tell you this: when the playoffs are all over with and everybody has their uniforms off, the only thing that's going to be blue and gold is Notre Dame's asses. Y'all take that to the bank.
Appreciate the call, Miami Hater. I disagree with a lot of what he said. I mean,
this ain't the same Notre Dame team I've seen all season.
I'm not. Yeah, and I'm not saying that he doesn't know what he's talking about, but I feel like if you're saying this is the same Notre Dame team as we've seen in recent history, you probably only watched the Georgia game and you just don't like Notre Dame.
Right.
I'm sorry. This Notre Dame team is significantly more talented than the national championship team, that we saw in 2012 against Alabama, the playoff teams under Brian Kelly. This is the best Notre Dame team that I've seen in possibly my lifetime.
I agree with you 100%. I think this Notre Dame team, again, outside of Northern Illinois, remember now, they started off the year going into the SEC on the road and beat Texas A&M. And you can argue that Texas A&M maybe wasn't as complete as they would have been on the backstretch of their season, but this team was at one point in time was fighting for a playoff spot. Well, it really had the driver's seat to find themselves in the college football playoff. They would have won their ball games, and Notre Dame beat them on the road. Went down to College Station, first game of the year, they beat them. I think that if you watch Riley Leonard, he's not reckless with the football. He's smart. One I will give him a lot of credit too is his legs. I was unfamiliar with the fact that he could run as well as he does. And defensively, again, when have we ever come up here and said that a Notre Dame team was the more physical team versus anybody they played in the SEC up until this point, where it looked like it didn't matter who was on the other side of that. Notre Dame was winning that ball game. They flew around in football. Their defense is what they hang their hat on. And I think Marcus Freeman I think he's one of the best coaches in college football right now. He's proven it this season.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I'll close with this. I just think that, we can say what we want about Georgia. And, if you don't think that the Kirby's best team, it's not. They still won the SEC championship. They were still the best team in the SEC based on how the season played out. And they beat Texas twice. And I just, I don't think we can really discredit Notre Dame's win over Georgia because the Gunnar like you, I don't think that Carson Beck being in that game would have changed the outcome of it, on top of the fact they are the SEC champions, and Notre Dame physically dominated them for 60 minutes in that ball game. And yes, they did capitalize on turnovers and score a lot of points in a short period of time, but when have we ever discredited a team for scoring quickly?
Right.
Like, that's more impressive, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. 205-834-9450. We get to your text message, your calls on the other side. Keep it locked right here on Morning JOX and JOX 94.5. 6:53 here on Morning JOX. JOX 94.5, Damian Mitchell, Conrad Van Order here with you for a few more moments, as you said, from McElroy and Kublik in the morning. Conrad, real quick, who you going with, Notre Dame or Penn State?
Notre Dame.
Me too. I like Marcus Freeman. I think that this defense is going to continue what they've been doing in the playoffs. I think Notre Dame finds themselves in a national championship. Didn't think I had that one on my bingo card, but here we are. 205-834-9450. Before we get out of here, let's go to the phone lines. Let's talk to Josh in Springville. What's going on, Josh?
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. How are y'all?
Man, can't complain about a thing, my brother.
Good, good. Hey, I wanted to comment on I think his name's Miami Hater. Did he say before at the beginning of the call, is he an Alabama fan or is he a Georgia fan? What fan is he?
Well, he's not a Miami fan, I can tell you that, but I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. Anyways, my point is, he was very defensive against Georgia, but if anybody watched that game, they were dominated from the first snap to the end of the final whistle. I mean, it wasn't even close. And the excuses that he was talking about were just, I mean, asinine, really. You know, I did not expect Georgia to get dominated by Notre Dame the way that they did. I thought Georgia was going to win that game.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I thought they were going to win.
Won that game from the very first whistle. They took Notre Dame looked like the SEC team.
Yep.
100%. And I honestly hope that Notre Dame wins it all, because they've got a damn good team, and we'll see.
Absolutely.